Gunditwe Magraduk, Niigaan Wewidum Nidishikos, Namago Shendo Dem, Nimenwenda Momayayan. It's nice to be here, even through this electronic platform. My name is Niigaan Sinclair, and I am an educator, a writer, editor of different things that you may be coming across in your career. I'm also a former teacher, and very proudly so. It's nice to be here with all of you in Hamilton Catholic for your Learning Day. Big thanks to all of you for the work that you've done to support my family during this very tough time where the loss of our father, also the loss of our mother last year. And I really appreciate all the support that you've shown in the creation of the bookmark to recognize the contributions Dad have made and the commitment that he made to all of you, that every single one of us have to pick up education, learn about each other, and then ultimately take action. If you look at the TRC calls to action, which were created by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, about half of the 94 have to do with education or so. And they talk about how do we engage a country, create a country different than what we had inherited. And it's ultimately about how we will learn about each other and commit as a result of that learning, and then create the country as we go, a place of justice and fairness and equity for all. That's ultimately what our job is to do. And of course, where did we learn that from? We learned that from Indigenous peoples. Indigenous peoples are the peoples who have been invested in everyone in a circle, everyone in a place, to make sure that every single person is heard, has a responsibility to bring their food to the feast, and then ultimately for all of us to share those things and to spend time with each other. And so that's what I really want to talk about for today. You've got in your hand, or maybe electronically, the booklet, which is Indigenous Knowledges, Joy, Beauty, and Brilliance, which was created by the Ontario Catholic School Trustees Association. I got a small hand in that booklet. I wrote a small foreword for it. I'm very honored that you would do this work and that you would try this commitment, or you would do this work on a day like this, that I hope you spread out throughout the entire year, to work on Indigenous education. To define Indigenous education would be impossible for me to sort of say what it is and to give you something tangible. But I'll try right now. Indigenous education is about both the formal learning systems. Those are things like ceremonies and time in the lodge and building our very formal existences, and then delivering those through, let's say, ceremony, or through something that is like sand teaching, or through our very formal processes of articulating specifically what it is that we understand about the universe by observing it, by witnessing it, by experimenting with it, but then publishing that research in writing that we have, and then ultimately sharing that formally. Those are things, protocols, and very strict and easily discernible things that we can explain to the universe and say, here we are. That's our ceremonies, our sunrise ceremonies, pipe ceremonies, those kinds of things. Every society has formal educational models where we teach the people, where they learn, and then they teach as well. We recognize those as quite formal things like school or institutions, and Indigenous peoples have had those for thousands upon thousands of years. They did not begin with the school system as of today, or it certainly didn't begin with the governments of Canada. They didn't begin with the provinces or the provincial system or the constitutional ways that we understand one another in this place. They've been in operation for thousands upon thousands of years, and simply education, this version of what you are doing right now, is just the latest incarnation for Indigenous peoples. Our complicated relationship, but yet a relationship where we now today send our children hoping that they would learn about themselves and also of those around them. But Indigenous education is more than that, far more than that. If you think about where you learn how to become a Canadian, or how you have learned about your cultural framework, or that you've learned about who you are as a family member, as a member of a community, as a member of a nation, most of it's informal. Those are in things like visiting. Those are in moments like learning perhaps an important song, or spending time with your elders, gaining the teachings that they have carried for thousands of years, handed down throughout their ancestry. And then now you get to carry that. That might be even a family recipe. It might be a story that's critically important, or it might be an object which comes with meaning. It is through the informal that Indigenous education has its biggest breadth, that thrives. It is Indigenous education in the informal ways that we spend time with each other, that we learn, that we share, that we ultimately publish and then articulate and then hand off to the next generation. That's ultimately what Indigenous education is about. It's about our engagements with the universe around us in every single way that we live, particularly in the ways that we spend time with each other and the land, the water. And then it is how we then witness and theorize and publish information so that other generations can see that. So that's what Indigenous education ultimately is. And embedded within all of those processes are what I call the 4 R's, which you're going to spend some time speaking about as you engage the booklet. And that's respect, relevance, reciprocity, and responsibility. In every single aspect of Indigenous education, you will find those 4 values. The first is respect. Respect is understanding that everything that we have around us comes from a different place. Good, bad, great, ugly, that they all come to this place. Niigaan wendam omayayin, and we are joyous for them having to been here. And then it is about us, once we get here, it's about understanding that we all have different expectations for our relationships. And that's where relevancy comes in. For Canadians, it's most oftentimes money, it's oftentimes status, it's oftentimes power. These are important things for Indigenous peoples as well, particularly in a modern context. But Indigenous education expects more than that. They expect Indigenous peoples to become better Indigenous peoples. That means better brothers, uncles, sisters, nieces, aunts, grandmothers, grandfathers, parents, that when you come to the end of the education system, that you are a stronger Indigenous person. So this is where we get a critical importance for Indigenous peoples, that we learn about language and culture, and particularly that we learn about our relationships with the universe around us in a familial kinship sense, not just in an ownership sense. While it's important, of course, to understand things from Canadian perspectives, that relevancy for an Indigenous person in education is also about how do we build a relationship not of hierarchy, but also of egalitarianism, or a kind of sense of equality, that the land is as important as our lives as well. Because as a famous elders often say, is that as we take care of the land takes care of us. And that is why we must recognize that the land is at the same par of us. It's not just about something that we own as a slave, but it's something that we recognize as a partnership, as something that is a family member, as someone who can speak and can write and can also help us understand how to live life in this place. Which brings us to reciprocity, that Indigenous education is about investing ourselves in a sense that the world is a gift-giving place. And it's our responsibility to give that gift so that we also receive that gift of life, particularly. But it's also of joy and kindness. And I think probably the most important gift of all, which is humor. You know, the world is a very funny place. It's complicated. It's full of contradictions. But part of that is about understanding that it's a funny place. And that this place that we then talk about the earth, but drive there in an SUV, is a complicated place, and it's not always going to be uniform. And so we have to sometimes laugh about those things and go like, what does that really mean? And sort of sit there and wonder in amazement at the beauty of creation, that it teaches us about all these things at the same time, which brings us to the last part, which is responsibility. That when we gain these teachings, now we have the responsibility to help others, to share to others, and to do that in a kind way, to do that in a way in which we ourselves would want to be talked to, taught, treated. Our responsibility is ultimately about how do we build a better place than we have arrived at, meaning a place that is sustainable, a place where there is always food and medicine for all. And that ultimately, it's not about leaving people behind. It's about how do we bring people in and we make a society that others can come in as well. That has always been the value that Indigenous peoples learned from the land, from the bears, from the fish, from the trees. And that Indigenous peoples invested in the newcomers, and we are now teaching the newcomers how to invest themselves in those 4 R's, so that when we create a society where everybody's considered and responsible, then we can now hand those 4 R's to the next generation, and so on and so forth, in a perpetual system of education that is both formal and informal in this place. So you will do all this work, I hope. You have an assignment to do. Get all that done within the next day. I'm just joking. But your job is to also get that done in your careers, in your work, in everything that you do, investing in Call to Action 63 with young children, which is not only about learning about Indigenous education and best practices, it's also about creating intercultural understanding, empathy, and mutual respect. That's 63.3 within the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, in that you've been called upon to create this country full of respect, relevancy, reciprocity, and responsibility. I hope that's helpful for everybody. I just want to say big miigwech and thanks for giving me a little bit of window on this day. I'm about to fly home, but I wanted to spend time today giving you this message and sending it out and my great love and respect to all of you. So big miigwech and thanks very much, everybody.